Good morning, everybody. I think I got a little bit more time, so as I do my presentation, if you got any questions, holler them out as I go. I'm happy to answer them as we go. Yeah, hats for everybody. So what I'm going to be talking about today is benchmark reporting and what metrics are involved in them. I've been in-house recruiting operations for about 3 years now. Prior to that, I was working as a consultant. So what I'm going to be going through, I started doing in 2006 with Electronic Arts, and they wanted to track the recruiting productivity around their 13 global studios at that time. I've worked with close to 20 different companies. The same look, feel, style that I did then, I'm still using today. So it's proved its worth in the time of, what's that saying? It's proved it's, yeah, tried and true. So it works. I know we like to get into the new whiz-bang and new technologies. This is not Power BI. It is not Tableau. It is straight up, give me your report on my system, drop it into Excel so I can easily create it, tweak it, share it, save it. So I use that, and it works like a charm. So let's jump right into it. So I'm going to walk through the exact reports that I use, but in order to get those reports, you need to get 5 data reports out of your systems. So the systems I work on are the ATS, the HRS. If you get into recruitment marketing, or maybe it's built into your ATS, it works like a CRM too, trying to get reports out of that also. That's easier said than done sometimes, but when it comes to your ATS, two reports I need to get out of that is a requisitions report, just your basic report. Some of those details when you fill out a rec, they're sitting there. And then I also get an applicants report. So all the applicants on open recs, that comes out weekly. So those are the 2 reports from your ATS. It's basically ATS agnostic. They're simple reports. Every ATS can create them. Then out of the HRS, I get a headcount report and a terms report. And what that gets into is when I report out on a quarterly basis, sort of the broader scope of your company, that's what those 2 reports fill in. And then the last report, the recruiting outreach report. I did a lot of work on Salesforce, avatars out there as your CRMs. A lot of the ATSs now are putting in outreach. JobBite has a piece of it. I believe Rehder does too. A lot of the ATSs have that now. Back in the day, that's how I started my consulting. It was sort of ahead of the game. CRMs, it was for sales. I would convert it for recruiting. But you get reports for outreach out of that one. So those are the 5 basic reports that you get. From those 5 reports, these are the benchmark reports that I put out to companies. I want to highlight the frequency of them. So the first one is the weekly recruiter summary report. So this puts a spotlight every Monday morning on recruiter activity. Now, every place that I've done this at, recruiters freak out. And they see everything in one screen. The leaders see it, the business leaders can see it if you push it up to business leaders. But after a few weeks, okay, I get it. I'm doing my job, so this just reflects that. Some recruiters, full disclosure, who aren't quite doing their job, kind of see the writing on the wall and manage themselves out. Doesn't happen a lot, but it happens. So that frequency of being weekly, it tells that short story. So a lot of reporting, if it's done quarterly or annually, that's kind of a long story, and long stories can become gray really easy. The short story, to put it bluntly, you can't bullshit the short story. It's week over week, just the facts. So that's the weekly recruiter summary that I'll walk through. The quarterly company summary, that looks at your company as a whole. That's where we include some of those HRS data and the rec data as far as like what was filled for that quarter, that year, or what have you. Then we get into the 20-point report card. I kick that out on an annual basis. It's just 20 points, kind of like a report card. When we get in school, you got your math, your history, your science. It's got 20 points within there and divided up within 6 categories, and we'll talk through that. Kind of what I think every staffing leader, recruiter, if you're really involved at your company, should kind of know about their company on an annual basis. Any questions so far? All right. So this is what the weekly rec summary report looks like. Again, it's Excel-based. It gets kicked out every Monday morning. Some places, it just goes to the staffing leader and they keep it to themselves. Other places, it goes to the full recruiters. Sometimes it goes up into SharePoint, so then it works like a shared document and recruiters can update it if they want. Again, it's Excel-based. You'll see here it's organized by recruiter in column B. So Ben Brown and Cindy Algram are examples of recruiters here, and then all of their open recs beneath their name. And then I'm just going to talk through each of the metric data points that I cover. So when it comes to the rec, you got your ID and title, obviously. We look at location, management level, hiring manager. In some places, companies have wanted, let's say a CTO, he wants to know what's going on within his department. So he gets this not organized by a recruiter, but organized by his managers. So you can see every open rec and the summary of it. Then you got your remaining openings, start date, open date, and the recruiting status. Now the recruiting status field is something there that if you're putting up on a SharePoint where people can edit that same single document, recruiters will red light, yellow light, or green light their rec, add a little comment, and then the staffing leader can go in and review that whenever they want to. These reports are basically agenda item number 1 if you do weekly one-on-ones with your recruiters or with your staffing leaders, depending upon your role. It's the talking point of everything. It gives everybody complete awareness of what's going on with your rec load. The next section is the overview section. So the metrics in there are the total interviewed, total applicants, total unreviewed, and percent unreviewed. So this is just focusing on open recs. I do want to highlight what unreviewed is. So this is the resume black hole. So what unreviewed means is somebody who's applied to this rec has never even been reviewed by the recruiter. They're just sitting there at that initial stage. It's astonishingly high at companies. I've seen people put effort and focus on it, and they get it below 10% ongoing basis. Most don't. If you're out there putting a lot of effort into your campaign marketing and branding and all that, and people are coming and applying, and they don't ever hear anything from you, except when you close a rec, they get told, hey, the rec's closed, try again next time, kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So I always like to highlight this unreviewed rate in here. The best company I've seen that keeps that below 5% is somebody who segmented their roles in the company, kind of like an agency. They had one recruiter that just focused on the talent and one recruiter that just focused on the hiring manager. When they segmented that talent, the unreviewed rates are down, so is their time to fill, cut it by 2 weeks in a month trial. So if you ever want to look at that, that's one of the best models I've seen work at corporate companies. Next section, think of this as a spreadsheet going from left to right, right? So here we have the last week's activities. So this answers the questions of, hey, what have you done for me lately? So this tracks the new applicants from last week, how many were moved to screening, which is between the candidate and the recruiter, that's that bucket. How many were moved to assessing, that's when you're doing submits to the hiring manager, maybe a hiring manager phone interview is in there, that's in that bucket. And then we look at interviewing, which is on-site interviewing, then how many moved to closing or the offer process. So that looks at what was done last week. So if you ever got a hiring manager that has a 6-week-old rec, wants to know what's going on, this is what was done last week. I mentioned before, these Excel sheets are easy to share. A lot of places where you have, let's say, a head of finance is wondering what's going on with the recs in his department, and you're the recruiter that recruits for finance. Copy, paste, send. Goes to the head of finance, he goes down to his managers, this is what's going on. Next thing you know, you have the managers in finance saying, can I be on that distribution list? Because they too want to know what's going on. So this type of information, this format, works great within the recruiting team. But see, if you ever have that need to kind of quiet the noise, because in my experience, a lot of hiring managers, they're noisy when they don't know what's going on. So this Monday morning information answers their questions before they have them. So that works great if you ever want to share it. And then sooner or later, they realize, hey, recruiting knows what they're doing, and they say you don't need to send those reports anymore. The last section is the current funnel status. So this looks at the rec as a whole and where everything stands now. So everybody knows the funnel that they see on the dashboard. That's what this covers. How many are sitting at new applicants? How many are being screened, assessed, interviewing, closing, and hired? So that's the recruiter or rec by recruiter tab in that spreadsheet. Any questions on that? Yes.
Is everything manually being inputted on a regular basis by the recruiters?
So the recruiters don't touch it. This is sort of done by an ops person. So if you're that recruiter that has to spend Friday afternoon 2 or 3 hours making reports for the managers or what have you, this replaces that. So what you don't see in this sort of screenshot is the reports get pulled from the ATS or HRS, get dropped into, I call it a data tab, and everything that you see here, these numbers, those are just little formulas, and they just run on that data tab. So it's a pull, copy, paste. Sometimes I do a little massaging if things aren't done correctly. So there may be a little massaging depending upon the system, but it's placed, hit refresh in Excel, and you got your numbers. So It takes time to build it, to make sure you get what everybody wants, but then that ongoing, it's just rolling. Again, nothing to do with the recruiters. Recruiters don't have to do anything. If you got recruiters doing manual reporting, this takes away. And that's kind of a lot of issues I hear with people. Why I have to spend so much time creating reports for my managers. This sort of answers that question. And there's a hat.
Oh, just real quick, can we get a copy of this?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
If you're interested
bring
in
a
all the
notebook.
formulas, you don't know formulas in Excel. I know a lot of people, not too many people are Excel geeks, and the ones that I've met are kind of pivot table people. That's the easy way out, in my opinion, and you can't format the look and feel if you do pivot tables. I always recommend formulas, because you can tweak it really easy and you can change things really easy. Sure.
I have a quick question for you, sorry, about I love the percentage of unreviewed resumes. So I'm curious, how is that presented? Is it presented to the recruiters, the hiring managers, and how do they receive it? I could, at my company, I could literally see us having a competition of our recruiters trying to get that number down.
Yep. So I've never seen that number presented to hiring managers. That's kind of, hey.
Yeah,
If it's an
exactly.
issue, it stays in the family.
Yes.
So that's between the staff leader and the recruiters. Yeah, I've never seen that's something we would delete out if we're sending it out. Unless it's good, then share. But if it's high, they're going to be like, why aren't you looking at all these applicants? I don't have any to review, and you have 25 sitting there for me. So yeah, that's between the recruiting team.
Do you put like a benchmark on that for your team so they know we need to try and get this number below 5%?
Yeah, so that would be the staff leader would decide that. I say shoot for 5 or below. Realistically saying, if you can get below 15, great. I've never seen anybody get that close and not make it all the way because they're taking the time to hit it. But I've seen some go down and all of a sudden, boom, it goes up. Now, there are times where, for lack of better words, I'll call them a commodity job. Like, let's say you're a QA tester, and you get 400 people that apply for a QA tester, and the skill set isn't that deep. So you only need to look at 30, and you're good to go. Well, that rec will have an acceptable high rate, because, hey, I got all these other recs to fill. And that's usually what it is. It's not a lazy recruiter. It's just, I don't have the time to do it. So it's like, hey, we need to manage it, so you do in such a way. So. Yep. And to your point, I'll show you in the next screen where we get into the competition piece of it. Yeah. So these are, one of the questions I get is, can recruiters see other recruiters' scores? And the answer is yes. I've never somebody say no. So it is a shared number, so you can see. Yep.
Hello. I was wondering how large the organizations are that you have suggested they use this for, because I have a smaller mid-size organization, and we don't even have a lot of these metrics. We're getting a new system where we will. But my first question is, how big are the organizations that you recommend using to use this report?
If you got 4 recruiters or more, I would
Okay.
say start now. Because what's really interesting is once you do it over time, you can see that. If you just have a small team of 2 to 3 recruiters, they're just filling recs as quick as they can, and that's a priority. It's probably overkill for that. Typically, the companies I've supported are 6 recruiters and up. Anywhere from 15 is probably the highest, like Sourcers. I had a high company with a lot of Genentech, biotech company, had really strong sourcing program. That was the highest there. This company's, I'm sort of some generic data, some of it's kind of real, some of it's kind of fake. This is for SailPoint, where we have 8 recruiters in there. So yeah, it sort of sets the tone too for your company. And if you're a staffing leader, this is how we do things here versus being in this gray area. So one thing about the applicants, so I only pull applicants on open recs. It's not like applicants over all time. That could be too big. Some ATSs say, which one did this to me? Job bite. So yeah, there you are. Hopefully you've changed this because it's been a couple of years. Your reports could only be 10 megabytes in size. So I had to tweak that a little bit to get 2 reports to get what I needed, because to keep that number under 10. So there's little tweaks like that, but in the end, you can basically get them. If you had a company, let's say, of 80,000 employees, and you're trying to get all that data, you may run into that, hey, the reports are too big, let's figure this out. So there's just ways around that. Yeah. Yeah, so this is strictly ATS. If you get into sourcing, depending upon the system, as long as it's not a spreadsheet, right? If you have a tool that's configured for sourcing, yeah, you can do that. This is just strictly once they become an applicant in your ATS, that's where these reports kick in. I have done it before where I worked on sourcing projects and I had the tool behind it. We would get into, if you get into sourcing, you have a lead, people we don't know, contacts of people we do know. The conversion from lead to contact would be a metric in here. Conversion to contact with, a screen, an interview, the source, everything like that. Is if it's in the system somewhere, yeah, we can pull it. If it's being tracked in people's emails or on some sporadic spreadsheet that a sourcer uses to track their own stuff, no. As long as it's in a system and that system can be reported on, yes. Any other questions? All right. So this is back to the competition piece of it. So this is an aggregate summary of each recruiter. So this is kind of like the baseball card. If you remember baseball cards, you turn it over, you see everybody's stats, right? That's what this is. So this kind of like, it's just kind of like the other one, but kind of aggregated together. So by recruiter, how many recs do they have? Again, by recruiter. So hey recruiter, what did you produce last week? I worked with Dolby Laboratories. They were trying to get in the video tech engineering. They hired a sourcer. He wasn't getting interviews. He was on contracts. So we track how many hires were made last week and then how many for this year. So this is where the horse race is. This is probably the one metric that the recruiters go to look at their competition. Hires for the year. That's kind of the horse race for recruiters for the most part. If you just do executive recruiting, your number's gonna probably be lower. But for everybody else, where do you stand? How many hires are you producing for the year? So that's that summary. That one doesn't go to business leaders. That's strictly just a team and staffing leader report. Any questions on that one? That's one when I roll this out, I get all kinds of questions. How'd you get this? How'd you get that? From the recruiters, right? They just want to know how I'm getting the numbers. I explain it to them, help them, and then we're off and running. All right, I know I'm sort of running late, but am I still good on time? All right, okay. This one is the quarterly report. This looks at the company overview. So this is something between the staffing leader and the head of HR or CEOs. It gets broad, this one, because it looks not just at, it doesn't even look at specifically recruiters and recruiter productivity or open recs. This is really looking at hires made, and it tracks from a company-wide perspective, quarter over quarter, year over year. It has different viewpoints. So here we're looking at it from the view of the business units. You'll see in that first column, there's 6 generic business units. It's an Excel file again. That's the business unit tab. You have your locations tab, your management roles tab, and the job roles tab. Job roles gets a little funky because some companies go a little bit crazy with what they call job roles, but the first 3 are pretty easy to do. Within each of those, these are the metrics that get tracked. So this is where we include some of the HRS type information. You got your head count. Now think of the Excel sheet going up and down. So you got your total new hires for quarter, year over year. If you've been running an ATS for a few years, you want to have this data as far back as you can. People just like to see the progression. We got all terminations, voluntary terminations, turnover rates, voluntary turnover rates, recs created, backfill recs, the percent. I want to highlight this one. If you're a staffing leader that's trying to predict, hey, in Q3, how many recruiters am I going to need to have on staff? So let's say you work with both FTE recruiters and contracts, and you know that engineering said they're going to be hiring 25 new additional headcount in Q3. Well, if you can look at your archived history of, well, what's our turnover rate and what's our backfill rate, I know I'm going to be having these 25 new headcount coming. I know because of backfill, I'm going to have an additional 10. I need a recruiter that can fill 35 recs. Well, if I had these conversations with comp people, they'll say, some finance people, oh, that's too simple. That won't work like that. But I swear it does. When you look over year, I give the company a number. You times that by your head count, and it's right in that range of like 2 to 3 off of recs. So it's pretty good. In a funny way, it works. But knowing your backfill rate plus your approved head count, new hire, works like a charm. And then we get into total recs filled And of course, everybody's favorite, average time to fill. That's the company perspective. Any questions on that? Still pulling from those same 5 reports, but this is mainly coming from your HRS system. Again, this is Workday information too. HRSs are interesting, but that information is in there. Any questions on that one? All right. And then the report card. So this is just me thinking, I think this is what companies should know, to know where you stand, good information to know about your company, kind of, if you ever get in a conversation with another company, kind of in the spirit of collaborating, good numbers to know. So I divvied up into 6 categories. An employment brand, offer acceptance rate. That's always something that people want to see, especially if you're getting into the CTGs, critical talent groups. Engineering and sales seem to be the most popular. What's your offer acceptance rates on those? Finance and engineering seem to really get involved in those type of numbers. Your turnover rates, internal mobility, that's a hard one to get, just so you know from my perspective, because how are you defining it? What's a promotion? What's a translateral promotion and things like that? But if you can get it, great. I think that goes back into your brand. Hey, come here, we'll train you, we'll get you promoted. So I think that's a great number to try and figure out for branding. Recruiting efficiency, again, average time to fill. Interviews per screen. SailPoint is heavy on engineering. They're trying to really fine tune. Hey, I want to get tech screens. How many tech screens do I need to get hires? So they're really focused on interviews to screen. The average number of interviews per rec is I highly recommend knowing. And then your vacancy rate. What manager always has open headcount? And it's recruiting's fault because it's not filled. So knowing the rate of your companies by department, good to know. So that's vacancy rate. Quality of hire. Everybody's got their own definition of quality of hire, so I just stick to tenure. So keeping it simple, to me a bad hire, they weren't here for 90 days. There's your 90-day turnover rate. First year turnover rate we track, and then I just like to track turnover of referrals. So I just think the ERP program is kind of interesting. Some people think it's a great concept, some people think it's a bad concept, but I like to look at it so much that it's its own category by itself. So if you have an ERP program, how many employees are actually using it? And by using it, I mean submitting people. Percentage of referrals that get hired, and the percentage of all hires made that come from it. That's kind of a generic one. Most people know their referral rate. Diversity tracking, your ethnicity hire ratio, your gender hire ratio, and then your diversity of applicants. So your hire ratios are kind of that number at the end of the funnel, and then your diversity of applicants is what's the diversity at the top of the funnel. If you're trying to build diversity in your company, are you trying different stuff? Is it working? Where do we stand? And then we get into recruitment marketing. So that's where we get into sourcing, branding, everything like that. Are you driving a high number of applicants per posting? Applicants and hires by source, so that's just your source of hire and source of applications. Talent pool populations, if you're building a CRM and you're starting to qualify people for future engagement and you want to highlight them in some way, that's my definition of a basic talent pool. Where do you stand with that? And then if you get into email marketing, what's your open rate? What's your click rate? Stuff like that. So that's what I recommend as a 20-point report card. I got about, all right, 1 minute. And then real quick, diversity. So we talk about that funnel of diversity tracking. We get into ethnicity and gender. This has been a hot topic lately at places. The back side? Yeah. So I'm going to speak to the slide that I just jumped from. So if you want to see if you have bias in your hiring, look at the top of the funnel of the diversity at the top of your funnel, and then look at the bottom of the funnel. Ideally, it should be equal. That means you're hiring the percentages of your applicants. This is my opinion, open for debate. But here's an example of applied. I kind of cut this together short so you can see applied to offers. So we track how many are applied, how many were screened, how many were interviewed, how many were hired. And we look at it by the management level. So this is an example of management level. You can do it by department again. But that's really tracking, hey, if we're bringing in this diversity, are we hiring this diversity? Are we trying to promote women in executive positions? Where do we stand with that? Are we getting our lots of female applicants? Are we hiring those? Where do we stand with that? So that's just an example of a little side benchmark of diversity hiring.